Among silent dunes and rocks forgotten by time, fragments of a forbidden past lay untouched, waiting for eyes prepared to reveal them. In the heart of Egypt, hidden in caves sealed for centuries, lay texts covered by the dust of centuries. These ancient writings, now called the Gnostic Gospels, did not just contain words. They carried a completely different view of existence and the divine. For those who composed them, true liberation was not achieved through rituals or repeated beliefs, but through hidden knowledge, reserved only for those who had eyes to see beyond the veil of reality. This knowledge, called Gnosis, was seen as the key to escaping the deception that permeates the visible world. They did not deny the existence of a creator God, but they questioned his origin. They believed that the material world had not been forged by a supreme and loving being, but by an inferior entity, deformed by vanity and ignorance. This being was Yaldabaoth, described with animalistic features, a grotesque fusion of lion and serpent, symbol of arrogance disguised as power. For the Gnostics, this demiurge did not represent good. He was the architect of a prison. Decades ago, around 1945, chance, or perhaps something more, led an Egyptian peasant to discover a jar hidden in the desert sands. Inside were fragile manuscripts written in Coptic, a language dating back to ancient Christianized Egypt. This collection became known as the Nag Hammadi Library. There were records of a spiritual tradition stifled by the force of orthodoxy. These documents presented teachings that the institutional church considered too dangerous to circulate freely. For their authors, the God worshipped in the pulpits was an impostor. The vision that emerged from these texts placed the physical plane as a prison for the soul. Matter, far from being sacred, was seen as a trap created to divert humanity from its true spiritual origin. The purpose of life was not to please the creator of the body, but to remember the essence that transcends it. For this reason, Gnostic writings are neither simple nor accessible. Each line was written with layers of meaning, full of metaphors, symbols, and riddles. There was no room for literalism. Truth, for them, was hidden like a seed hidden inside a stone. This kind of vision aroused the wrath of the early Christian leaders. The Gnostics were persecuted, their texts burned, and their teachers accused of heresy. Still, their followers insisted on preserving what they believed to be light in the midst of darkness. They buried their manuscripts like those who plant hope for the future. They hoped that one day, in a more receptive time, these ideas would be read, discussed, and understood by minds ready to break with what had been imposed on them. Among the many texts found, one of the most intriguing is the Gospel of Thomas. Unlike the canonical Gospels, it does not narrate miracles or recount events from the life of Jesus. Instead, it presents a series of 114 phrases attributed to him, enigmatic, profound, provocative sayings. One of them states, "Split the wood, I am there. Lift the stone, and there you will find me." For many, this is a statement about divine omnipresence. For others, it is a coded statement about the reality hidden behind the appearance of things. Another crucial manuscript is Sophia of Jesus Christ. In this work, Jesus discusses with his disciples topics such as the origin of creation, the true nature of the soul, and the story of Sophia, an emanation of the divinity who tried to act on her own. Her rash act resulted in the creation of the demiurge, Yaldabaoth, who in turn created the physical world. Thus, matter itself becomes the consequence of a cosmic error, something that needs to be overcome and not glorified. The human mission in this context would be to awaken from torpor, recognize the divine spark within oneself, and return to spiritual fulfillment. Another text that provokes interpretation is the Gospel of Judas. In it, the character so vilified by tradition, is not presented as a traitor, but as someone who understood something that the other disciples were unable to grasp. Judas, in this account, fulfilled a necessary role, acting at the request of Jesus himself. This reversal of roles was not only provocative, it forced the reader to abandon certainties and revisit concepts considered sacred. The ideas defended by the Gnostics were not limited to contradicting the official religion. They offered an alternative path, an invitation to introspection and self-knowledge. Their texts functioned as mirrors, reflecting what each reader carried within themselves. There were no promises of easy rewards, nor clear instructions. Understanding depended on the inner preparation of those who dared to face the enigmas presented there. Even today, the messages left on these scrolls still echo like whispers of something greater, waiting to be heard by those who refuse to accept reality only for what it appears to be. One of these fragments, ambiguous and disturbing in meaning, declares, "We will judge the 12 according to their generation, and we will destroy them." A provocation, a metaphor for the breaking of paradigms, a veiled criticism of the pillars of tradition. None of these answers is definitive. Each line seems designed to be deciphered over time, or with the soul. When Christianity was still in its infancy, various groups fought not only for influence, but for the very meaning of following Jesus' teachings. The Gnostics were among them, not as adversaries, but as seekers of a truth that did not fit in temples or dogmas. Those who followed the Gnostic path did not consider themselves merely seekers of God. They saw themselves as holders of veiled knowledge, a thread of light amid shadows, capable of breaking the chains of institutionalized faith. While the nascent church advocated obedience, collective belonging, and salvation through belief, the Gnostics focused on individual experience, inner revelation, and the spark that dwells within each being. It was impossible for two such contrasting views to coexist for long without colliding. When Christianity began to consolidate itself as an official structure, Gnosticism came to be seen as a growing threat. In the 4th century, the tension became intolerable. Gnosticism was formally condemned as heresy. Texts were hunted down and burned, their teachers persecuted, and their doctrines branded as blasphemy. The survival of this knowledge depended on the courage of those who preferred to hide manuscripts rather than see them destroyed. In clay pots, buried in caves and deserts, these works were preserved in silence until they were rediscovered many centuries later. Among them, the texts of the Nag Hammadi library revealed a theology profoundly divergent from that promoted by the Church. More than doctrinal differences, what emerged was an opposite conception of reality itself. While traditional Christianity claimed that the world had been created by a loving and just God, the Gnostics saw the universe as a mistake, an imperfect construction born of the ignorance of an inferior being, the demiurge, also called Yaldabaoth. This figure, described as arrogant and blind to the existence of a higher power, believed himself to be the only God, but was only a shadow of the true divine. The material world, under his rule, was considered a prison, an illusion created to imprison the divine spark within human beings. This conception of reality not only contradicted the dominant narrative, but also threatened the theological pillars on which the Church was founded. The differences did not stop at cosmology. The figure of Jesus himself was interpreted in a totally different way. For orthodoxy, he was the sacrificial Redeemer whose death and resurrection offered salvation to all who believed. For the Gnostics, however, Jesus was a revealer, an emissary who had come not to be worshipped, but to transmit secret knowledge capable of awakening the human soul from its deep sleep. The Gospel of Judas, for example, presents a radically unexpected view. Judas is not the traitor, but the only disciple who truly understood Jesus' plan. His betrayal was not an act of treason, but part of a cosmic mission to free Jesus from the flesh that bound him to the material world. This interpretation dismantled centuries of doctrine and offered a disconcerting view of the most familiar story in Christianity. The Gospel of Thomas, on the other hand, avoids any mention of the crucifixion or resurrection. In it, Jesus speaks through enigmatic proverbs, offering a symbolic map for the inner journey. One of the most striking teachings states, "If you bring to light what is within you will save you. If you do not bring it to light, what is within you will destroy you." This maxim summed up the heart of Gnostic doctrine. Salvation lies in self-knowledge, not in the intermediation of religious institutions. This approach called into question the role of the Church as mediator between God and the faithful. Gnostics did not recognize the need for bishops, priests, or sacraments to reach the divine. The connection was direct, personal, and non-transferable. This principle posed a threat to the authority and structure that the Church was building, a structure based on the official interpretation of Scripture and control over religious practices. The Gospel of Philip, in turn, questioned the nature of rituals. The Last Supper with bread and wine was seen not as a literal event, but as a metaphor for deeper spiritual truths. The Gnostic insistence on decoding symbols rather than following them literally undermined the idea that rituals were indispensable means to salvation. Knowing this, the Church's reaction was immediate and relentless. Councils such as the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD established the parameters of what would be considered true Christianity. Gnosticism was discarded, its texts banned, and its ideas erased from public records. In doing so, the institution not only defined a doctrine, but sealed its political and spiritual power. Even so, the Gnostics did not disappear. Their writings, though banned, survived in hiding. In remote places, protected by layers of earth and silence, they remained until new generations were ready to rediscover them. These works not only reveal an alternative Christianity, they reopen a debate about what has been lost, omitted, or shaped over the centuries. The confrontation between orthodoxy and gnosis was more than a theological clash. It shaped the form of faith as we know it today, defining what could and could not be questioned. With the resurgence of these texts, doors that were once closed are now opening again. And the invitation now is to reflect how many other truths are still buried. The tension that marked the early centuries of Christianity still reverberates today. The dispute between the centralized authority of religious institutions and the individual search for spiritual experiences remains alive, especially among those who question what has been accepted as absolute truth. Although official tradition has prevailed as the dominant voice, echoes of rejected ideas continue to influence restless minds, provoking new questions and opening paths previously considered closed. The Gnostic Gospels are a clear example of this other perspective. Unlike the canonical texts, they do not present fixed truths or defined doctrines. Their language is symbolic, laden with metaphors and riddles that invite personal interpretation. The reader finds no direct instructions, but challenges that require introspection and discernment. Rather than offering security through dogma, these writings launch the reader on a journey to discover what lies hidden within. The Gospel of Thomas is one of the most emblematic expressions of this approach. Abandoning the traditional narrative structure, the text brings together phrases attributed to Jesus that do not explain, they provoke. One of the most quoted passages states, "Break a piece of wood, I am there. Lift up the stone, and there you will find me." The depth of this statement does not allow for a single interpretation. Some see in it confirmation that the sacred is present in everything. Others see an invitation to look beyond appearances, to discover hidden layers of reality and of one's own being. The Gospel of Philip, in turn, explores themes such as spiritual union, light as a symbol of knowledge, and the so-called bridal chamber, a concept that suggests a fusion between soul and divinity. The description of this union is not literal. It represents the reunion of human beings with their transcendent origin. These images are not just poetic, they are tools for awakening, keys to understanding something that escapes ordinary words. The dualism present in Gnostic thought is at the heart of almost all of its texts. The physical world is described as a distorted reflection of the spiritual plane, a prison shaped by ignorant forces. In the Sophia of Jesus Christ, the character Sophia, a divine emanation, attempts to create something on her own, without the consent of the supreme source. Her mistake gives rise to Yaldabaoth, the demiurge, who goes on to rule the material universe, convinced that he is the only god. This figure is portrayed with animalistic features, such as a lion's head and a serpent's body, elements that symbolize his corrupt nature and arrogance. The creation of the world, according to this view, was not an act of love and wisdom, but the result of a spiritual failure. This contrasts sharply with traditional Christian theology, which considers the universe to be a good work, made by a perfect God. For Gnostics, everything we perceive with our senses is illusory. The true home of the soul lies beyond this plane, in a realm of light and knowledge. It is in this scenario that the concept of salvation takes on another meaning. Instead of depending on faith, grace, or obedience, spiritual liberation requires awakening, an awareness of the soul's imprisoned condition, and a return to its original state. The body, the world, religious institutions, all of these are part of the machinery that tries to keep the spirit asleep. Texts such as the Gospel of Truth explore this symbolism in greater depth. Light in this context represents gnosis, the divine knowledge that dispels ignorance and reveals the true nature of existence. Darkness, on the other hand, is associated with matter, error, and distance from the creative source. This light is not merely decorative, it is a living, active force that guides those willing to follow the inner path. The Gospel of Judas, in turn, takes an even bolder approach. In it, Jesus is not only a teacher, but a cosmic being who speaks of stars, constellations, and spiritual events in almost indecipherable language. Judas, traditionally condemned, is portrayed as the only disciple who understood Jesus' mission. His surrender is not betrayal, but part of a necessary plan to free Jesus from the prison of the body. This gospel includes mysterious statements such as, "Sacrifice the man who carries me." The seemingly brutal phrase can be interpreted as a call to abandon the ego, break with the illusion of the physical self, and allow the spiritual essence to reveal itself. Like so many other Gnostic passages, this one also remains open to multiple readings, and that is precisely the intention. The texts were not written to indoctrinate, but to challenge, provoke, and transform. This ambiguity is not carelessness, it is a choice. True knowledge, according to the Gnostics, cannot simply be taught. It must be discovered, lived, and earned through inner merit. Metaphors and riddles protect the teachings from misuse, while testing the spiritual maturity of those who read them. Only those who are ready will be able to decipher what is being said. Symbolism also serves as a shield. In times of persecution, making texts accessible only to initiates was a form of protection. The deliberate use of veiled language prevented literal interpretations and ensured that the deepest messages were only understood by those with the sensitivity to perceive what is not written in black and white. Today, these texts are resurfacing not as historical curiosities, but as invitations. invitations to re-examine what we understand by faith, truth, and divinity. Invitations to look beyond fixed forms and find a personal path, one that does not depend on ready-made answers, but on the courage to seek, question, and ultimately remember. In addition to pointing the way to inner liberation, the Gnostic Gospels required the reader to engage deeply with each word. They offered no ready-made formulas and demanded no submission to external rules. Each teaching, shrouded in dense metaphors and symbols, functioned as a mirror, challenging the seeker to interpret, reflect, and transform. Understanding was not something given, it was earned. For the Gnostics, enlightenment was an intimate process, a gradual awakening that depended on each person's willingness to break with the illusions of the visible world. These enigmatic texts did not appear out of nowhere. Their birth occurred at a time of intense transformation. The first centuries of the Common Era witnessed cultural, religious, and political changes that would profoundly shape the spiritual future of the West. The Mediterranean, under Roman rule, was a mosaic of beliefs and philosophies. This melting pot of ideas fostered the emergence of new spiritual movements, among them Gnosticism, which not only dialogued with various ancient traditions, but also boldly reinterpreted them. The very origin of Christianity took place within this complex environment. Initially a branch of Judaism, the new faith absorbed external elements and adapted its practices as it spread. Gnosticism emerged from this same fertile ground, but took a different path. It embraced aspects of the Jewish tradition, especially the notion of a creator God, but radically reinterpreted this concept, influenced by Greek philosophy, especially Platonism, and by Eastern currents that were already reflecting on the dualism between matter and spirit. The term gnosis in Greek means knowledge, but not in the intellectual sense. It was revealed, intuitive knowledge, the result of direct experience with the divine. This kind of understanding could not be taught in sermons or books. It was like an inner flash, a forgotten memory that needed to be rekindled. For Gnostics, this was the only path to true freedom. The soul, trapped in a physical body, was condemned to repeat cycles of suffering until it remembered its heavenly origin. While Christian tradition claimed that the world was created with purpose and goodness, Gnostics saw physical existence as the consequence of a mistake. According to their texts, the figure who appears as the creator God in the Old Testament, Yahweh, was not the supreme source of the universe. For them, this entity, called Yaldabaoth or Miurgus, mistakenly believed himself to be the true God, but was only a corrupt emanation, born of an unbalanced act of the entity Sophia, who attempted to create without the guidance of the original divinity. This interpretation challenged the roots of Christianity and Judaism, as it portrayed the creator of matter as ignorant and imperfect. Furthermore, it transformed salvation into a process of disidentification with the physical world and reconnection with the spiritual. Texts such as the Gospel of Judas and the Gospel of Thomas presented a Jesus who did not seek devotees, but rather awakened individuals. His words did not call for worship, but understanding. He spoke in codes, with short phrases full of hidden meaning, directed at those who had already begun the inner journey. The Roman context allowed these ideas to circulate. The influence of Hellenistic thought was profound, especially the Platonic teaching that the sensible world was an imperfect copy of a higher reality. This notion echoed precisely in Gnostic doctrines. As in Plato, the goal of the Gnostics was to return to the realm of perfect forms, to the original light. They also drew close to Zoroastrianism, the ancient religion of Persia, which already expressed the struggle between light and darkness, spirit and matter, a duality that the Gnostics expanded to the entire cosmos. However, as Christianity gained strength and moved toward becoming the official religion of the Roman Empire, dissenting views began to be suppressed. Gnosticism, with its rejection of ecclesiastical authority, became an internal enemy. Its followers did not recognize the need for priests, bishops, or intermediaries between man and the sacred. Each person was responsible for their own liberation. This directly threatened the hierarchy that the Church sought to consolidate. Leaders and theologians, such as Irenaeus of Lyon, wrote treatises against the Gnostics. Irenaeus, in his work against heresies, accused them of manipulating the scriptures and spreading dangerous doctrines. His criticisms were not only theological but also political. Unifying doctrine was essential for the institutional strengthening of Christianity. Therefore, at councils such as that of Nicaea in 325 AD, the Church defined what was acceptable as true faith and excluded anything that contradicted this standard. Gnostic texts were then banned, considered subversive. Their authors and readers were persecuted, many documents were destroyed, and the memory of this thought was almost lost. However, some manuscripts survived. They were hidden, buried, or simply forgotten until centuries later they reappeared. The Nag Hammadi Library, discovered in Egypt in 1945, revealed a precious collection of Gnostic gospels, treatises, and reflections preserved against all odds. These texts did not return merely as historical relics. They brought back questions that remain unanswered. Is the world we live in really what it appears to be? Is there a truth beyond appearances? Are we condemned to obey, or can we awaken to something greater? For those who dare to ask these questions, the Gnostic Gospels offer not certainties, but possibilities. While many sought comfort in fixed doctrines, the Gnostics proposed something else: transformation. For them, the true purpose of life was not to obey, but to remember. To remember who we are, where we came from, and what we can still be. This vision, which has spanned millennia, continues to echo among those who are not satisfied with easy answers. If these teachings resonate with you, perhaps you are ready for something that goes beyond the visible. The forbidden name of Jesus is still accessible, but not for long. The link is in the first pinned comment. Take advantage of it while it's still available.